First things first, and when I would say every parent needs to trust their instinct when it comes to their own child. Like, your child better than anybody else. So, of course, you're going to talk to your child's teacher and see if they see what you think you see and have that discussion there. You definitely want to, as a parent, make sure all avenues have been tried before the referral process, because the referral process is really, why do you suspect your son or daughter has a disability, has a disabling condition?
It's the Empowerment Perspective Podcast, hosted by Demiso Josie and Mr. Kareem Spence. Stay empowered. Stay empowered. All right, welcome to yet another episode of the Empowerment Perspective Podcast. I go by the name of Dr. Demiso Josie, and I'm joined as usual by Mr. Petty. How's it going, sir?
Well, I'll say this, right? First day I get a chance to work from home, it rains. That makes no sense at all. Like, the weather couldn't be a little better. Outside of that, man, I mean, we get to petty holidays, man, when people start buying like petty gifts and hanging up like petty decorations.
Yeah, it makes sense. So wait a minute. So I think it's a good idea that it's raining because you're supposed to be working anyway. What do you need, the sunshine and all that stuff for? You telling me? Because last time you was like you had a problem with sitting on the couch. You glad you were back. Now y'all shut it down. You went back to remote, and you telling me that you need sunshine?
Absolutely. I mean, what's the sense of being home if the sun's not going to be out? Like, all other days, it was nice and sunny, 75 degrees outside. In October, we had the unusual weather. Now all of a sudden, it would have rained on the first day.
Makes sense. We're all still hybrid where I am, which I feel some kind of way about, but I'm just gonna let that slide for now. Jamie, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I actually enjoyed my first day home.
I see you still got the Christmas tree up. Nothing's changed.
Oh, we're waiting. We're still waiting.
Waiting for what?
For Santa to come.
All right. I'm not going to have this discussion with you again, Jamie. Not right now. We're not going to do that right now.
It's just creepy for her. We waiting for a guy to show up at our house at midnight in a red suit.
Maybe she's used to creepy guys in red suits coming to the house at midnight. Maybe that's the thing.
Well, she did have that cable guy. I kept asking if she was good.
That's funny. That is hilarious. So, on the last podcast, we had Stephen Bowler, Stand Tall. Steve, on what you guys think about that show?
Steve is awesome, man. He just brings about a different energy. So I can imagine, what it was like working for him in the building when you have that much positive energy that walks through the door every single day. So he's just awesome, man. I'm just happy that, he's just extended himself to be able to work, with other schools outside of just working in a single school. So he's good.
Makes sense. Now, Jamie, did you get offended when he said that COVID is a short person's virus? Were you offended by it?
I was not offended because it's not true. There are a lot of tall people that are quarantining. Actually, I know more tall people that are quarantining than tall people.
Wait a minute, everybody tall compared to you, so of course you know a lot of tall people. you can't throw that out there like that. But what was your impressions of the podcast?
He has so much energy with him. He's a great speaker, and again, I could only imagine working under him. It's all positivity. I couldn't get any negative vibes from him at all.
So that was Stand Tall, Steve. We talked about educational leadership specifically. We didn't really dig into leading into, during the COVID season, but we did talk about how an educational leader can impact all aspects of school, and it's really about relationship building. So if you haven't taken a minute to check that out. We also talked about our toy drive. So we can't do it in person, so we're doing a virtual toy drive for the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Again, shout out to those people who already donated. We are so close to our $2,000 mark. I think we're at $1,710 right now. So we only need a couple more hundred, and we definitely gonna make that. And I definitely know we're gonna make it because I didn't make my donation yet because I wanted to see where everybody else, was gonna put into it. But on this podcast, when it comes to the world of special education, there's probably only a few people that I actually trust to actually talk about special education and know exactly what they're talking about. She's a phenomenal educator. She knows all things special education, and I leaned on her early in my administrative career to actually learn a lot about special education. But the more I got to learn about this person, I learned that she likes to read a lot, and we started reading a lot of the same books, and we kind of, conversation started getting a little bit deeper. Then I found out her husband, I believe, was a Temple alumni or worked for Temple, just made it even better. And he's in technology as well. So I couldn't pass up the opportunity, although this person has been ducking us for 3 years now. So she better come with some content that is going to be fired. But it's my pleasure to introduce everybody to Miss Kathleen Sweeder. How are you doing, Kathleen?
Great. And no pressure to be so.
That's what I do. I put pressure on you.
No, actually, I'm thrilled to be here, and I absolutely owed you after all those years of saying, yeah, sure, yeah, okay, no, next week I'm too busy.
You treated us like we were the IRS. I get it. We sent you a couple of slips and pink slips, and they finally got the red, and then Jamie was like, I got this.
Taken for granted that you'd always be around, and then I was wrong. So
we talked offline about Jamie's ulterior motives of why she got you on this podcast in the first place. For those of you who don't know, Jamie teaches in special education, and at one point in time, we were all in the same building at one point in time, but then I guess Jamie decided to go to another building. So when I leave, she gets back. Well, before I left, she came back into the building. And now she's asking to leave again. So that's why she got Kathleen on the show. Ain't that right, Jamie? That is true. That's pretty petty of her, ain't it, Kareem?
Listen, she's taking notes from the best. That's all I can say. That she's rubbing off on her. She has little petty ways. That's what we gonna call it.
Well, let's dig into special education. Let's first talk about, because we're big on why people do what they do. So I'm going to ask you, Kathleen, why special education? What made you go into this direction?
Are you sure you only have a few minutes? Because I've never been known for telling a short story.
That's fine. I'll listen.
All right. Why special education? I think it all originally stemmed from my early volunteer work. And, if you start working with somebody who has special needs, yeah, and if it's for you, there's just going to be something inside of you that triggers. And you're going to realize that you're getting so much more out of what you're doing, than what you think you're providing. It's hard work, but it's really uplifting work. So did a lot of volunteer work as a kid. Thought, this was going to be my calling, going to go into special ed, and, this is it. And ended up at a college that insisted if you were going to be a special education major, you also had to be an elementary major, a dual major. And that's what they were producing. And I think they were way ahead of their time because I hate to admit this, but this was in the 80s. So, they were talking about what a classroom would look like, which is what we live in now, where it's gen ed students, special education students, for the most part, in the same environment all day long. So they insisted on that. And I thought, well, this gen ed stuff is a waste of my time, but I'll do it because it's part of the program. And then during college, I started volunteering at Holmesburg Prison, and I started tutoring. And that completely changed my trajectory because I met, like every person I tutored were adult males who couldn't read or write. And, I hate to say I was naive in, my early 20s, but I was shocked by that. Like how could this person, get through a school system and not be able to read or write? So then that completely changed my course. And I was like, okay, well, maybe I really want to go gen ed, and teach people how to read, like get in there early. So that changed everything. And I start working in Camden because I wanted to work in, inner city school district, and taught first grade, which I never thought I would want to teach really little kids. Like I was picturing like middle school special ed kids, but I was like, if I'm going to teach someone to read, that's where you have to start. So it was amazing, and it probably made me, the best teacher I could be, because unfortunately that school did not have tons of services. So, I never knew about any special ed services when I was there as a gen ed teacher. I didn't know what was available to me. It was kind of like, you make it or you don't on your own. And it's not you as the teacher, it's, there for your kids. So, so in my world, special ed and gen ed has intertwined, and I really think that's the reality of special ed. It's hard to look at it in isolation, and because of personal reasons, I ended up, going into another district, and then that's where I was a gen ed teacher, and I saw students that had needs, and I saw the services that were there, and I was advocating for my students to get the services, and let's just say I was having a discussion with an administrator, a very lively discussion. And he basically said to me, well, when you get your special ed degree, let me know. And I said, I have it. And I got one of those phone calls over the summer. You're going to be teaching special ed in September. And again, it was the perfect move at the perfect time, because I was able to take all that information that I got from gen ed, which maybe you don't have in your college program. Like, you don't really learn classroom management in your college program. You don't really learn the standards and the curriculum in your college program. You learn a lot of theory. So I had all that, and I really think that made me a better special education teacher, because I knew what the goal was. I knew where I had to get those kids, to make sure that they ultimately, if they could, ended up in some kind of a integrated program. So, long road.
It's interesting story, the volunteering and all that. I kind of want to take two different paths in this conversation. I want to start with, for those parents, because what I come across right now as an education leader is that a lot of parents either don't understand the process, they don't understand what's involved in special education. 9 times out of 10, they probably heard it from a teacher saying that you should look into this. So let's go from the beginning in terms of the referral process. What does that mean to a parent? How would you break that down to a parent?
Sure. So that's a great area to focus on, because so many parents don't know about it. Either it wasn't something that they, people relate their own experience in school. So either they didn't experience that when they were in school, or some people experienced it when they were in school as students themselves. But special education has changed so much in 30 years that sometimes I think some parents are almost afraid to go that route, because they think it's going to be the experience they had. So, first things first, when you're, I would say every parent needs to trust their instinct when it comes to their own child. Your child better than anybody else. So of course you're going to talk to your child's teacher and see if they see what you think you see, and have that discussion there. You definitely want to, as a parent, make sure all avenues have been tried before the referral process, because the referral process is really, why do you suspect your son or daughter has a disability, has a disabling condition? And some people don't look at special ed that way. They think this is just going to be some extra help for my child. My child needs help, they're not making it. But it really, special education, by law, was designed for an individual who has a disability, and they really can't access their education in a gen ed model without some kind of level of support. So that's the number one thing, because if you're not ready to, even as a parent, consider the conversation that your child might have a disability, you kind of can't go any further in that process. Right. So that's the first thing. So can you, and even as a parent myself, I sat down and talked to my own child's teacher and said, is it the content or is it the pace of the content? Sometimes you have to have a deeper conversations with your child's teacher to get there. Now, for the referral process, every district is going to do things a little bit differently, even though there is a special education law that lays out the process. There's a lot of good advocacy groups, like SPAN is a great group if you're looking for information. You can go on the Department of Ed website and get a parent's rights in special education booklet. The child study team is usually a district-wide team, not necessarily in every building, but someone in your child's building can connect you with that team to get some of that initial paperwork. But ultimately, the team in school consists of a school psychologist, a learning consultant, a psychologist, and then as needed, ad hoc, they'll bring on a speech pathologist, an occupational therapist, an audiologist, something like that. So that team, once they receive a referral, has to meet with the parent within 20 days. But the team has to look at what interventions were done, and that's the problem that trips up a lot of parents.
I want to pause you right there because there's a couple of things that I want to make sure that the parents that are listening make this clear on the actual referral can come from a parent, can write to the team saying that I want my child to study.
Correct.
There's also, depending on your school district as well, Kathleen mentioned there's certain, interventions that were done before. So you might have an intervention in referral service or INRS team that kind of precedes some of that stuff. You also could have a 504 situation as well, which I'm going to get into the difference between the 504 and IEP as well. So for the parents out there that, simply if you want your child studied, you can simply write a letter to your school's child study team saying, I would like them to be studied. But there's also other avenues to do that. Teachers themselves are not supposed to make referrals. They can't make referrals, but they can obviously give you all the resources. Now, Kareem, I want to bring you into this discussion at this point because a lot of parents, there's a stigma that comes with their child being in a child study team. Because one, you're ashamed to admit that they may have a disability. What can we do as educators to kind of educate the community so that we can kind of get rid of the stigma of the child study team, your child being into child study team?
Well, I think more important than anything is that even before a teacher is having this sensitive conversation with a parent and or with a student, that should not be the first intervention, is when a student's struggling in the classroom. Mom, you should probably write a note and no, that is not the first intervention. Like Ms. Sweeder said, how about figuring out whether or not if you're moving too fast? How about figuring out whether or not if they truly understand the content? Because they may not be able to understand the content, which is causing you to see the different behaviors. Or how about this? How about trying to figure out if there's something going on at home that can be causing them? Maybe the lights are on. Maybe it's too dark for them to read because there's no electricity or the family's struggling economically. So there's a lot of reasons as to why students struggle academically. And I don't think that the first response for us as educators should be, you should write a letter. Because even as Kathleen said, we're just going to have a meeting first and we're just going to talk. Mm-hmm. And then we're going to have to set up another meeting, then possibly, decide whether or not if we can schedule you to even find out if you actually have a learning disability. Mm-hmm. So that time that this student is going through the process, it's not helping because, again, he's still going to be struggling. Even we take the last day, the 19th day or the 30th day, whichever policy your district follows, this is still 29 or 28 days that this kid is still struggling. Mm-hmm. Now, as far as the stigma, everybody has limitations and not everybody learns at the same pace. And I think that parents have to really understand what is the learning style of your particular child. For me, I'm someone that can listen. Don't you sit me down, try to have me read no book. We be sitting there all night. But if you tell me I'm more of a learner that can learn vocally, and you can actually show me, and then I'll get it. You just have to really understand what your son or daughter's learning style is because that's so important. You have to know your child. So you always say be a student of your student. How about being a student of your child and knowing your child?
Makes sense. I always look at it and I try to tell parents this. I said, we've got to look at what is the best placement for your child, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, let's take a student that might need ESL services, right? That may be struggling. Is it more beneficial for that student to be in that ESL class or into that special education class, even though he might get a one-on-one aid or some other services, but which is more beneficial? So I think school districts got to do a better job of explaining what all the services are in your school, and then trying to figure out what's best for each individual child. You might actually be doing a kid a disservice by putting them in the child special education course. Now, Jamie, Kathleen mentioned the team. As a teacher, part of that team, you're a part of that team. What are some of the things that you assess and bring to the table during, let's say, a typical IEP information gathering session? Like, what information are you being asked of as a teacher?
So we're definitely ask students levels in meetings. So that requires a lot of data keeping throughout the school year, different types of tests to determine if there's any growth throughout the school year. And then also what type of modifications and accommodations we're using in the classroom setting to allow that child to either succeed, or if they're not working, what else we think that we should be doing in addition to what we're already doing in the classroom.
Now, Jamie threw out some big words out there, modifications and accommodations. I'm going to try to break it down. So Kathleen, can you break down the difference between a modification and an accommodation? Because I hear it all the time in meetings, and parents get confused because the words get interchanged. And I'm like, no, that's not what that is. That's what this is. What is the difference between a modification and an accommodation?
So I think the best explanation is that a modification means you're changing, you're modifying something. An accommodation is where the curriculum doesn't require a change. So modifying, I'm changing typically curriculum somehow. An accommodation is something that I can do for you so that you can access your curriculum the way it is, but I haven't had to change it. So if I'm going to take the same test as my peers, not changed, so not modified, but in order for me to do that, I just maybe process my math a little slower. I need time. Time would be the accommodation. So I can take the same test as everybody else. I can follow the same curriculum. I just need time. Or I have, problem focusing in the classroom. So I should never be in that first seat, because if I miss that teacher's direction and I'm in the first seat, I'm going to turn around to see what everyone else is doing, and now I'm going to be in trouble again. But I might do really well in the second seat, because then if I miss what the teacher said, I have someone a row in front of me that I can look at, right? I didn't change any of the curriculum. I just made an accommodation so you could access the curriculum. But if I have to change the curriculum, that's a modification. So, maybe I have to, I'm going to take a math test that's very similar to my peers, but I'm not going to have the word problems on this math test, and I'm changing something. That's a modification. Does that make sense?
Makes perfectly good sense to me. I get it. Hope people that listen will get it. Earlier, we talked
so if they don't get it, they can watch podcasts over and over again as many times as they need to. Yeah, they
get our viewership up. Keep rewinding and watching it.
We're gonna call YouTube. You're gonna call YouTube, and we're gonna get that modification for them. Not gonna change anything.
That's funny. So, Kathleen, you mentioned earlier 504 versus an IEP, and you can even throw INRS in there. 504s technically fall under special education umbrella. Can you explain the difference between the two?
Correct, sure. So honestly, for me, it helps me look at the origin, or where did this all start, right? So special education was designed so that students who we recognize these learning differences could receive supports in their education, or a different education. That's basically what's special in special education. 504, if you think about like the Rehabilitation Act, and think of people coming back wounded for war, and they now may, because of their injury, they might have what's considered a disabling condition. But what would they need to be able to be successful in the workplace? Like, that's really where the Rehabilitation Act came into place. So if you think of kind of like the origin of the two, it's easier to kind of to understand. So if I have a medical condition and it inhibits me in the classroom, but I need something, right? I might need some accommodations, but I don't need specialized instruction, right? Then that's kind of a 504. I mean, if you think about it, if you're in special ed, there's some special education teacher like Jamie who's somehow connected to you, you know, like you could see her a lot or you could see her a little, but somehow you are connected to the special educator. In 504, you're not connected to a person, but you might need a piece of equipment in your room, like like a sound field system, like an FM system. And with that, you can access your education. So like I have students who are deaf and hard of hearing that I take care of. Some students need a special education teacher, to access curriculum, but other students just need to make sure that we have like a sound field system that interacts with their cochlear or their boots. So a person kind of versus equipment almost.
Right. So even though the lines of that probably is definitely blurred now, but in its original form, I guess to put it very, very basic, a 504, what I'm hearing is 504 is more physical and the IEP might be more cognitive. Even though the lines are a little bit blurred right now because there are certain school districts that are, I think, using 504s incorrectly. But that's another podcast for another time. But it's the same thing on a very fundamental, basic level that's really if I could break it down.
Right. But the one thing I've heard people say that I think is incorrect is they'll say like, oh, you really need an IEP for your child because that's a lot, that's a weightier document. Like that means more. Well, a 504 document, like if you violate that, that's the Office of Civil Rights that's coming down on you. To be honest, like that scares me more.
Yeah.
Because I think I could beg for forgiveness on the other side and we could work it out. So if you ask me which document, is more weighty, I'm like, I don't really think you can say that. I think that's an misunderstanding of the concept. They're both weighty documents in their own right. You don't want to violate either one of them. The IEP is going to be more intense because it's going to lay out an instructional plan.
Right.
A 504 is not going to lay out a plan. They're going to say, this is what this child needs to access their curriculum.
Now, Jamie, in your classroom, the IEP, I guess just to break it down a little bit, as a teacher, one of your first things is you should obviously identify that you will have special education students in there, but looking at their IEPs, like what are some typical things that you might see in a student's IEP from a teacher's perspective?
Oh, I think that some of the most common things that I see is small group testing, study guides, read alouds, extended time to hand in papers. Those are probably the most popular accommodations that we see in an IEP. Access to books on tape. Those are more along the lines of things that we see that are in a lot of my students' IEPs.
Okay, so let's go back to the process. So now I'm a parent, we're in a meeting, the team is there. What kind of things are being discussed in this initial meeting?
So your initial ID meeting, just so you know, that's gonna occur 20 days after the team receives that referral. Whether that referral is from the parent, a teacher, INRS, whoever, that's gonna happen. In that meeting, that should really be the parent and the teacher's platform to tell that team about that child and what they see, and especially for the teachers to provide some data. That's very, very important for the team to get a holistic picture. And we have to have the parents' information there. Now, it's not going to be super in depth. I mean, you're talking about a 30-minute type of meeting, but you are basically presenting the student so that the team can say, okay, basically, am I hearing some red flags? Do we suspect that this child could have a disability? If so, let's plan out what kind of testing we're going to do. And you plan that out. That team is required to plan that out based on what disability they suspect. So that's why I'm saying, like, that information that comes to that ID meeting is very important, because you're pointing the team in the right direction. Or they're going to say, there's not enough information here to convince us that this is a student who might have a disability. Or you've identified a problem, but we haven't seen any intervention to try to address the problem. Because if we provide an intervention and a student responds, that's what we want. We want the students to achieve, right? So that's what's going to happen at that meeting. You want your guardians there, you want a teacher there who knows, the child, and then you want to basically try to point the team in the right direction.
Now, parents, hear me clearly here. It is important for you to tell the truth and the whole story. Don't withhold information. Information is confidential. It's not going anywhere. But I look at it this way. You let's say you're taking your child to the doctor, right? And your doctor has some symptoms, right? The child has some symptoms and whatever is hurting. You're not going to withhold information from the doctor, because you want the doctor to be able to heal that child. So it's important for you to be open and honest about everything that you see at home, and that they're asking you about their development and those things of that nature. Be completely open and honest, because the more information these teams have, the better off they can serve your child. It's a really important piece there. I get some of the stuff may be embarrassing to you, and it may be hurtful to bring it back up, but it's important for schools to know this information so that they can accurately assess your child and actually accurately place your child and give them the services that he or she may need. So that's extremely important piece to the puzzle.
A parent really has to allow themselves to be vulnerable in this process, in order to help their child. And there's really no embarrassment. If you think of it, like, that's a good analogy of going to the doctor. You're probably going to assume the doctor's already heard it all. You know what I mean? Well, you can't imagine, this is a confidential situation. Those teams have heard everything. You're not going to be the first person that ever sits in front of them and tells them X, Y, and Z. I guarantee it. But if you could be vulnerable and talk about things going on, and a little bit of even family history, if you see a connection between what you went through as a learner and then your own child, or even maybe you saw this with an older child and you didn't act on it, and then years later you kind of regret it, and now you're trying to, like, head it off at the pass with the younger child. You just have to be able to do that, because that team really can't move in the right direction without the parents, really being honest.
Now, Kramer, I ask you a question kind of in the same vein. You have a parent that comes, may have had some very bad experiences educationally, and now they have a child that's going through the system, and they come to you like, Mr. Spence, I don't trust these people. I don't know what to do. My child is struggling. Like, what kind of advice, what is that conversation like from your end? Because I know it came to you before. I know parents have come up and said certain things to you. So
you talking about like Friday, Thursday? What day you talking about? Okay, so here's the thing, and what Ms. Sweeder, said was team. And when a parent doesn't feel that they're connected with school, they don't even feel part of the team. So for them to even feel vulnerable in a meeting and share all that family history, they really have to believe that you have their best interest in mind, meaning their son or daughter. And if they don't feel that, then they're not going to be honest, and they're going to be probably a little standoffish. And it's going to be really difficult in putting the proper accommodations or even interventions to be able to help, because they really don't feel like they're connected. Now, for me, what I try to do is let them know that they have someone that they can trust. So I can be an advocate for them. I can be an ally for them, so that if no one else they trust, then you can put your trust in me, that my team is going to do the very best in being able to help your son or daughter to the best of their ability. Whether we get services or not, we still got to learn how to read. Whether we get services or not, you still have to know how to count. At the end of the day, you still have to know how to function as an adult in this world. So for me, it goes beyond just being able to get them to one, like, assistance. but more importantly, for them to want to participate in this process and become a part of the team.
It's good. Yeah, it's a good point you made, because I want people to understand that whether you have a 504 or whether your child is in child study team, doesn't necessarily have to be a life sentence.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you get in there and then you just feel like there's no out, right? So especially with 504, because I'm part of the 504 team, my goal is to actually hopefully get you to a point where you don't need these accommodations anymore. You
Mm-hmm.
don't. So we'll start weaning certain things off. We'll start, getting you on your own 2 feet. So at some point in time, you won't need these accommodations, or at least learn how to manage your situation so that you don't need them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's important for parents to know too that just because your child is in child study team, it may not necessarily be a life sentence.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to advocate for your child too, because they'll keep them in there forever. Unless you work with your child and work on those targets, because in your IEP you're going to have certain targets that you're going to meet.
Mm-hmm.
You have the plan, it's written right out there for you where you need to be at X amount of time. So let's work to try to get these accommodations, or modifications removed at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So it definitely doesn't have to be a life sentence. The other piece is a
Mm-hmm.
living document.
Mm-hmm.
It can be changed, it can be revised, it can be updated. Don't think just because this is what's happening now, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
happen in your whole entire career. Good
Mm-hmm.
schools and good teams are supposed to be assessing the plan constantly
Mm-hmm.
and making changes constantly. So if this is not happening, as parents, you need to go back in and advocate for your child. Like, all right, it's kind of, again, like the doctor. They're going to give you some medication. You're going to assess, is the medication working? No, some side effects. Let's go back and revisit it. It's the same
Mm-hmm.
kind of concept. So it's really,
Mm-hmm.
really important for you to, as parents, to stay on top of that.
If you're not going to read anything else, make sure you read that plan. Ask questions for the next meeting, because we're meeting every year.
And
So I love the word advocate when you said like I'd be the parent's advocate. So that's something else that's important for parents to know. When you're invited to a meeting, it's going to say in your invitation, do you want to bring anybody?
Mm-hmm.
And by all means, bring someone you trust to that meeting so that you have an extra set of ears. And I've worked with child study teams to try to get them to imagine how it feels for a parent to walk into a meeting where you have, more than 5 people sitting around a table.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's intimidating. Like, like imagine that walking in, who are these people? And that you're like, you've been invited to a party, but you don't know any of the other guests really, really well there. You're going to feel a little awkward and insecure. And then if they're talking about things and asking you questions, can you remember everything? So it says in your invitation that you can bring somebody and just, let the team know basically. So, and bring a trusted friend if you want.
Mm-hmm.
And that person can sit and even just take notes for you so that you can feel comfortable talking to the team and asking questions and answering questions. So like definitely you're part of that team, but it doesn't have to be one-sided. Bring someone with you just for someone to have your back when you leave the meeting. You can say, hey, did you hear them say this? Did you hear them say that? Did we remember to ask this question? It's real important. You don't have to walk in there on your own.
Bring a pen and a pad and write stuff down, because you're not going to remember everything verbatim that was said. Even though they're going to give you the little document for you to review, you need to make sure that you are writing this stuff down. You're talking about your child here. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Don't come in there and just sit there and try to remember everything that's going on in there. Take notes. It's important for you to do that. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about the educator side of it, especially now during COVID. Things have definitely changed, obviously, in education across the board. Trying to teach remotely, hybrid, it's all new, it's all different. The way education is being done, it's never been done before. So now you have that on top of trying to provide modifications and accommodations to students remotely and in person. Jamie, as an educator, how difficult or what is that experience like for you? I see you shaking your head like you know what I'm talking about.
Definitely. It's like this is year 15 for me. So year 15 is almost supposed to be kind of easy. You know what you're doing. look back on what you've done in the past, there is none of that anymore. Everything is brand new. So every lesson that I'm teaching right now is brand new. I'm making new material. I'm working at nighttime over the weekend to get stuff ready for my students. So it's almost like being a new teacher all over again.
I think that's a good thing. Even on an administrator's standpoint, I feel like, if you've been in it for so long, it just becomes, routine. It's like, all right, this is something new. It's a whole new problem I have to solve. But also from a teaching perspective, it's kind of like, well, here's an opportunity for me to sharpen some new tools in my toolbox, you know what I mean? And expand on my, teaching skills and ability. Kathleen, from a special education perspective, how difficult or what were some of the challenges that you're facing right now in the world of education with remote/hybrid or whatever you want to call this learning?
That's a loaded question. So being able to support the families at home, being able to support the teachers going through it like Jamie just discussed is, it's all consuming. And getting everyone to recognize that not everyone has the same opportunity for learning at home. Like I think we hope as educators, the classroom is a good equalizer. You know what I mean? Like if you can shut everything else out, can you control what happens within your room and support your students? And, remote instruction kind of takes that away. So, getting educators to also, realize, what's going on, 3 kids on devices at the same time, families that have 4 children who have IEPs, like it's intense. So getting everyone, I would say, to communicate and have relationships, it is the key. That's what really worked for us last spring, was that, the one thing everyone said to me was, I know the parents so much better than I did before March, right? So I know it's kind of hard right now because we just kind of got back in the door, per se. But thank goodness we did, so we could get that connection and start building those relationships. And another challenge to that is beyond, the classroom and that instruction is also teletherapy. This was something that public schools were not allowed to do in Jersey, and then, so again, just like Jamie said, you have a group of professionals and it's like day one of being a speech pathologist, or an occupational therapist. And what about a physical therapist who usually does hands-on learning? And we have students that learn through, ABA, applied behavior analysis, and that hands-on learning. It is a challenge to duplicate that. I've seen amazing things. You know what I mean? I've seen teachers and what they'll make for students and make sure it goes home so that they can participate in this remote instruction, but, have a laminated sheet in front of them with, pictures on Velcro strips and move it around and actually be interacting with, like, the creativity is amazing. But it's a challenge because let's just face it, not what is everyone's capacity to be that creative too. So so again, those relationships. So then forming a group of professionals who can help each other as well. That was a big part of what we did with the related service providers, bringing people who might be like, you might have 5 occupational therapists, but they all work in different buildings and they don't know each other. Well, if you can bring them together virtually and they can lean on each other for ideas, you're going to have better services. I don't know if that answers the question, but.
I think one of the things that it keeps resonating in all of these podcasts that we're doing during this time is, to me, the root of education is relationship building. And I find that early on, the teachers that were struggling had issues with building relationships with their kids and their parents, right? So the ones that really were up against it and having really an issue with it, I found that they didn't have that skill set. That should be day one, number one. It's just telling me that you haven't developed that relationship with your children. I get the times that you're gonna have to reinvent yourself. I get the anxiety and all that stuff right there. But bottom line is, if I'm a student, I'm not coming to your Zoom session if I don't like
Right.
you.
Right.
I'm not doing it. So ground number one, especially if I got parents at home that don't care if I show up or not, I'm not coming.
Mm-hmm.
Want me to sit in front of, on my comfortable couch, eating chips, sit in front of this computer and watch somebody that I don't like? Number one job is to build that relationship from the gate. So what we try to do, at least at our schools, that first couple of weeks is become a student of your student, get to know them, to know the parents. Understand that parent is sitting right next to their child at home, probably taking a test for them. That's happening. All of that. So that relationship. Kareem, how important it is. I know we talk about it all the time, but just in case people haven't heard it before, how important, especially right now when your child is, let's say, remote or hybrid, is developing that relationship between your teacher and student and parent.
I'll say this. As like educational professionals, we own year-to-year contracts. I don't know if everybody understand that. Like, our contracts are year to year. And when you say teachers are having difficulty with building relationships, they might want to opt out, because it's not going to get any better in the years coming. Because now with the new in transition, and they realize how much success we've had with educating via online, it's going to be the new standard. And when you say that parents are listening, you may not be able to see what's going on behind the camera, but parents are watching and they're telling on you. I know this because they call me and tell me all the time. You know what's going on with these kids? No, I don't know what's going on. You might want to go into that classroom and figure out what's going on. Now, for me, because I have about maybe 85 classes, now I got to figure out which code goes to which classroom at a particular time. So by the time I get on there, none of that is even happening no more, because it takes me about 40 minutes. But yeah, I mean, but you're right. I mean, to be able to build a rapport, you're actually building a partnership. And for our students that are so young, they're not doing the work because I shouldn't say all of them are doing the work. Majority of them are doing the work because they like you. It's only a small percentage that is doing the work because they realize how important it is for the opportunities later on in life. But for most of them, if they like you, it's nothing that they won't do for you. But if they don't like you, they're not coming to the classroom, they're not doing work, or anything like that is going to occur.
That goes for administrators and supervisors as well. Get to know your students. I've been popped in so many Zooms and so many meetings with students that haven't been doing work, and it's like, oh, Mr. Josie's here, right? I need to make sure that I at least do this assignment. Like, you know what I'm saying? That it's not even coming from like an authoritative position, but I've developed a relationship with 99% of the students in the building where I can have a sit down and be like, all right, listen, we gotta get this work done. And they'll respond to it because of the relationship that has been developed.
Mr. Josie's here. Turn off TikTok, y'all. Mr. Josie's here. Stop TikToking.
Put that ball down in the back. Yeah. That all of a sudden cameras are popping on. I'm actually seeing students in the session before you get that little circle with the little initial in it. It's all good though, but it's all relationship building at the end of the day. That's key for any educator. But it's definitely a difficult time, and it's hard to make those adjustments from the special education world. But there's got to be some give and take on parent side of it too. There's some things that we just physically are not going to be able to do. Like you mentioned OT, like how do you do that? A PT, how do you do that if your kid is home? Like you got to work with, again, develop that relationship to be able to work with school to be able to do that.
I've seen amazing things, but you know, another thing is if a parent has a student that has an IEP and they don't think, you know, the remote education's hitting the mark, and they've had maybe a discussion with the teacher and it's not happening, that next step in that relationship is that case manager. So that was really big last year too, because we also saw some students that, you know, they thrive in a structured environment, and you can't duplicate that at home. Like I said, if you have, you know, 4 children with IEPs simultaneously, like you just can't do it. So, parents who reached out to case managers and had this conversation and told them what was going on, that helped a lot, that they trusted the case manager. And again, it's a two-way street. I saw that happening, like you said, with the case managers who already had built that relationship, right? But now the parents could say, like, hey, this is something that's going on. And even though we hadn't seen that at school, now how can we wrap our head around that, and what can we do? And so we were able to do some things like pull in a behavior specialist, even if it wasn't in a student's IEP, because, the parents, maybe needed some help setting up that learning environment or whatever. So real important too, that parents know who can they turn to. And if your case manager doesn't answer, then you better find a supervisor.
If your supervisor don't answer, don't call me, because all I'm going to do is go call the supervisor and say, why did you answer that call in the first place? Nah.
If you opting out, I'm opting out too. Don't call me either. I don't know why they're not answering the phone.
Matter of fact, I tried to call them the other day.
They mad at me now. They're not answering my calls because of you.
We should call somebody about that. That's too funny. Well, I want to switch gears real quick before we get out of here. Kathleen, I know I mentioned earlier that you are an avid reader, and I haven't talked to you in a while. I need a good book. Doesn't necessarily have to be educational.
Okay, well, all right. I'm excited that you asked, because I actually was able to take some me time with reading. When life was getting crazy last spring, and I was telling all my teachers, this is not a sprint. You're in it. Then I realized I had to start taking my own advice. So I had to get back to the stuff I love, which is reading. So I just finished a book. I wouldn't say it's educational, but actually just ordered it because I listened to it online when I was walking, and I liked it so much. I was like, I have to have this one, because this is one I have to read again and write in the margins. And that's, I actually have it right here because it just came in. Leading Through Language, Choosing Words That Influence and Inspire by Bart Engel. So that's a good, just inspirational. And then my favorite fiction, I can give you two. One, you're not going to love. It's a chick flick. Jamie can read it in 10 years.
Jamie don't
it's a really old one called something like I Hate My Neck and Other Things About Being a Woman This Age. But it's written by Nora Ephron, who was the comedic author who wrote like When Harry Met Sally and everything like that. So Jamie, you got a few more years left, but you call me in 5 years, I'll give you the name of that book.
I don't know how old you
I thought she was talking about her neck. Like, you ain't got 5 more left. You got 5 more years of that nice neck.
But I just read a piece of historical fiction that's called Daughter of a Queen. Have you heard that one?
No.
All right, it is awesome. It's about Kathy Williams, former slave, and becomes enlisted in the Buffalo Soldiers. Disguises herself as a man. Really, really awesome book. And the narrator is so good, I would actually advise that you listen to that one, because the narrator is that good. So you can't do it?
Well, here's my thing. I tried the audiobooks. I don't like sitting and listening to people talk, like go to class or anything like that. I'd rather read. I don't know. I can't sit and listen.
Yeah, it's such a good story either way. But I discovered when I was trying to like get out and walk and not gain my COVID-19 during COVID-19, that the public library has a free app called Libby. Didn't know that, so that was amazing, because I could just, go on there, download a book, and go for a walk. But
just
I
wish
think
more educators would read. Like, I don't see how you are in education and you don't constantly read and try to, pick up information and things of that nature. So it's kind of refreshing to actually have these conversations with you when we were working together. I was like, holy moly, somebody actually read it. I can have a conversation with.
My favorite college professor said, if you're too busy to read, you're too busy to lead. If you're a teacher, you're a leader. So I took that to heart.
That's pretty deep. That's dope. Interesting. I'm not even gonna ask you, Kareem, what last book you read, because this is the Rated G podcast. I don't need to talk about no iceberg slim. I don't need to. So I'm gonna throw the question to Jamie. What was the last book that you read or listened to?
I'm reading a book right now. It's really it's interesting. It's a true story. It's called Who Will Hold Me? I'm only reading a few pages at a time because she tells a very deep story. So I can only take so many pages of it at a time. It's taking me forever to read this book.
Another chick flick book. Is that
like it's an inspirational story of a woman getting out of a very difficult situation. So when I read, sometimes I like to go back and reread the page if there was something on there that I think that I need to hear again, and I highlight, and I take a lot of time reading books like this.
Interesting. Really, really interesting. Bunch of chick flick.
Can we talk about cake? Because like Kathleen she likes cake too. She's a foodie.
That is true.
Yeah.
Taking her head up. She's like, Kareem, you completely made that up. I don't like no cake. So is it true you're a foodie?
She's a foodie.
I don't know. I'm spoiled because my husband cooks for me.
Whoa, time out. Wait a minute.
And we have issues when we move to South Jersey with all the food.
Does he have a brother?
I agree with that. What you say? I missed that one.
Something about her neck. You got like 5.5 years, 6 years left. I don't know.
Better protect your neck.
I'm going to text Jamie the name of that book tonight.
You all right, Jamie? Okay, just check it. Well, Kathleen, definitely thank you for being on and giving us some wonderful information that we can pass on to our listeners. It's more geared towards parents than more so than educators is kind of what I wanted to do because for whatever reason, parents are not getting this information. A lot of them are, and they're just kind of going through the process for the first time. And it can be intimidating because you are sharing sensitive information. You don't understand everything that's really going on in terms of services or how it's going to impact the child and all these things. So at least getting an basic understanding of the process is very, very helpful. So I'm definitely thankful. So Jamie, any last words before we get out of here?
No, it was a great conversation, but I think the best part was finding out that Kathleen's husband cooks for her.
I'm going to have to have a conversation with him. You know. I'm going to say, listen, Mike, there's HelloFresh out there. She can just follow the instructions. She can't really mess that up at least 3 times a week.
Husband's brother.
and don't say the word can't. I can mess anything up that has to take place on a stove or in an oven.
Unbelievable. Many last words before we get out of here.
I will say that in the 3 years we had to wait for Ms. Sweeder to pop onto the podcast, she did bring some really good content, so we're appreciative for that. And really just helping parents get some really good information to navigate through the education process because it is really extremely tough. Like we know because we're in it, but when you're outside trying to access certain things, it becomes really, really tough. So just want to thank her for showing up finally 3 years. I don't know, like if she was in prison for 3 years, she had to do like 2.5, and she got furloughed just for the weekend. The governor did just release a whole bunch of people. So I don't know, maybe Kathleen was one of them. She has some
That is pretty funny.
For
our people out there that are listening, don't forget our toy drive is going on right now for the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I don't care if you are going to donate to our cause, donate to somebody during the holiday season. I know this podcast is going to come out past Giving Tuesday, but there's opportunities for you to do that not only on Tuesday, but throughout the season. Even if you just pick a local family in your neighborhood, decide to bless with a meal or something, a couple of gifts for their children, just do something, because the world definitely needs some positivity and some loving and healing right now. So make sure you're doing that. We're going to keep trying to bring you some fire content. I don't know who we got on next week, but we got somebody on next week. I know we got somebody coming on with a nonprofit that's doing wonderful things about how to build your resume and do interview techniques and all that stuff. So we're gonna have them on there too, on here too. So we just want to keep trying to bring you this fire content before the end of the new year, because then we're gonna do our countdown and then we'll wrap up season 5 and hopefully be back for season 6. We still got people watching this. Until next time.
They'll get that COVID. That's absolutely. They'll get that COVID and you watch it.
Until next time, stay empowered.